there was to be a second face-to-face meeting, for lack of a better way to put it, with the technical people. And to be quite frank with you, Madam President, we find it unacceptable, even the excuse that was given, that they're unable to meet with us for whatever reason. That baffled me completely. And while the response that you gave me just now provides a way forward, it denies the members of the Senate that opportunity even before the debate continues, that was actually kind of promised for us to engage with the technical folks. I get the impression, I don't want to be critical, that these technical people might be in over their heads. It was very clear to me, and that is frightening for the passage of this bill. It's very frightening when it is that the CEO and the Labor Commissioner are unable to answer, and then we ask them to come back. And the reason we ask them to come back, if you recall, Madam President, is not because we were done and we needed their responses. In fact, time had fleeted us. We spent almost 3 hours, and the issue was that they were unable to give us direct responses, so we adjourned in order to give them the opportunity to prepare themselves to come back and sit with us to flesh out some of these issues, if you will, Madam President. And I'm disappointed that if the way forward is what you've suggested, that in fact that promise of us getting the chance to speak with the technical people back and forth in the chambers would have been neglected. So, thank you.
Yes, Senator, as a note, let us let the process work. Let us hear back from the technical people. We are unaware at this point, as it came in very late, as to what those responses have been. Let us see if they have responded to the questions, the observations, the recommendations, the comments have been made. Let me also remind that once a bill is committed to the Committee of the Whole, there is also an opportunity for amendments within that committee as well, and there is also an opportunity for the technical experts to also join us. So while I recognize and take note of your recommendations and your opinion on the matter, I will ask that let us see the process work.
Madam President, you have, I think, adequately outlined the way forward and given a proper response. But I think it would be remiss of me to say that on this side we have to categorically reject any notion or of any assertion of these technical persons, as you suggested, Senator Farber, and I will not seek to repeat what was said, but it has to be placed on record that the Labor Commissioner and her team, and certainly the team and persons from the AG Ministry, are all professionals, are all persons who are very steeped and learned in their area of practice, and certainly we cannot accept any assertion to the contrary. But I wish to further state and wish to point out that the purpose of requesting senators to place and put their comments and views in written form is to allow the technical persons to properly address the concerns that senators may have. I think it's important to point out that those types of meeting ought not to be regarded as an inquisition, but it is, the purpose is to assist. The technical persons are assisting senators as legislators to arrive at an informed consideration and decision-making on a point of policy and legislation. So having put, if that was done, your written comments in writing affords these technical persons the opportunity to properly ventilate and respond to whatever comment. I know there were a couple senators who in fact did that. I'm not quite sure if indeed they were all senators, but suffice it to say, Madam President, it would be remiss of me if I did not say that. Thank you, Madam President.
I seek one clarification, because after the...
It's a clarification, because remember, we are not engaging in a debate
Yes, ma'am.
at this time.
The clarification is just to seek whether the 3 hours that we spent in the chamber and the comments that were made and put to the technical people are going to be regarded, because if you listen to what the AG just said, what is going to be dealt with are those written comments, and I wouldn't want us to have wasted 3 hours of the honorable senator's time in this chamber. And again, I make the point that what happened in that 3 hours was unfinished business. So there's a lot more that senators wanted to contribute, but the meeting was cut short with the understanding that there would have been a follow-up meeting. Thank you.
As far as I am aware, Senator, all the comments, observations that were made in that meeting were documented and forwarded to the technical team that was here. And I believe I have responded accordingly because the clerk has documented all of that. Honorable members, the question is that the second reading of the Occupational Safety and Health Bill 2025 be deferred to a later date. All those in favor kindly say aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it. I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. So, Senator Farber, the clerk's office also have technical persons who are very skilled, and so everything that is said here, they're verbatim taken down, and they know how and what to do. And the responses will be forwarded to you, so you would be able to verify that for yourself. Madam President, I rise. Madam President, I rise to move the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, Climate Strengthening Marine Ecosystem Resilience by enhancing wastewater infrastructure in Keycaca, US $12.25 million loan and guarantee motion 2026. Madam President, whereas Belize, as a member country of the Inter-American Development Bank, the bank, is eligible to receive development assistance from the bank in the form of loans, grants, and technical cooperation on such terms and conditions as may be agreed between the government of Belize and the bank from time to time. And whereas the Belize Water Services Limited, BWSL, is a state-owned water and sewage utility responsible for the provision of water supply and sewage services in Belize. with a mandate to deliver safe, reliable, and cost-effective and sustainable high-quality water and wastewater services in an environmentally and socially responsible manner. And whereas on 22nd October 2025, in the motion it says 2026, Madam President, but that clearly is an error and should in fact be 2025. The bank's Board of Executive Directors approve financing to PWSL in the amount of US $12,250,000 to support the implementation of a program to strengthen marine ecosystem resilience by enhancing wastewater infrastructure in Kikaker, hereafter referred to as the program. And whereas the program comprises, again here, Madam President, there is an error in the motion. It says 2 components, but in fact there are 3 components, which I will take senators to briefly in a few. So the program comprises 3 components with the following objectives. 1, to increase access to safely managed sanitization services in prioritized areas of Kikaker through the construction and commissioning of a sewage system and wastewater treatment plant for the village. And 2, to strengthen PWSL's institutional capacity to design sanitation and water projects that incorporate climate and nature-related risks, and to monitor, report, and verify climate and biodiversity impacts. And whereas the approved financing will be provided through A, an IDB direct investment loan to the BWSL up to the amount of US $10 million, and B, a non-reimbursable investment financing contribution of US $2.25 million from the Global Environmental Facility GEF Trust Fund administered by the bank. And whereas a condition to the bank's financing is that the loan to BWSL shall be guaranteed by the government of Belize, consistent with the bank's policy requirements on guarantees for such operations. And whereas Section 7, subsection 6 of the Finance and Audit Reform Act, Act number 12 of 2005, provides that before the government offers any guarantee or some form of security in support of any loan made directly to a private sector entity or statutory body by any public or private bank, financial institution, or capital market in or outside Belize, the government shall seek the approval of the National Assembly. And whereas BWSL as borrower shall be responsible for the execution of the program, acting as the executing agency. And whereas the loan is being offered to the BWSL from the bank's ordinary capital resources under the following terms and conditions. Loan principal amounts US $10 million. Disbursement schedule over a period of 5 years from the effective date of the loan contract, but may be extended subject to the consent of the government of Belize and IDB. Loan term, 25 years inclusive of a 66-month grace period on the principal repayments. Repayment period, 39 approximately equal semi-annual and consecutive installments of approximately US $256,410.25. Purpose, to enhance coastal water quality in Kikaker and to strengthen BWSL's institutional capacity to integrate climate and nature-related risks into governance, planning, and operations. An interest rate shall accrue on the daily outstanding balance of the loan at the COFR base rate plus the applicable lending spread for the bank's ordinary capital loans. And a credit fee will be charged on the undisbursed loan balance at the percentage to be established by the bank on a periodic basis, not exceeding 0.75%, less than 1% per annum. Now therefore, be it resolved that this Honorable House, being satisfied that the loan proceeds will contribute to enhance coastal water quality in Caye Caulker, benefiting tourism and strengthening the adaptive capacity of vulnerable coastal marine ecosystem, while facilitating access to green finance, approves that the BWSL may borrow the said sum of US $10 million from the IDB on the terms and conditions set out above, and authorizes the Board of Directors of the BWSL to execute and deliver the loan agreement and other associated documents. And 2, approves and authorizes the Government of Belize to enter into and provide a guarantee agreement in favor of the bank in respect of the obligations of BWSL under the loan agreements on the terms and conditions set out above, and further authorizes the Minister of Finance to execute and deliver the said guarantee agreement and all documents associated therewith. Madam President, this loan and guarantee motion has the support of the Cabinet. Madam President, whilst the direct beneficiaries of this loan agreement is the Caye Caulker village, certainly will inure to the benefit of the entire country, as indicated, Madam President. One of amongst the components of this loan is, and senators will find it, let me share it, in the Annex A to the loan agreement. There are 3 components. Component 1 is the wastewater collection and treatment system for Caye Caulker, which I'm sure Senator Stettino certainly will be supportive of. Component 2, which is the improvement of services by BWSL. And component 3 is the institutional strengthening to support BWSL's commitment towards environmental sustainability. Madam President, as I said, this loan motion and guarantee and the various components all inure to the benefit of the country, and therefore commend for the consideration and support of senators. Thank you, Madam President.
Recognize Senator Patrick Farber.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And let me say from the onset that we on this side of the Senate, we endorse the wastewater system for Caye Caulker. We believe, Madam President, that it is a good thing for Caye Caulker. And as my friend, the Attorney General, the lead government senator for today indicated, my colleague, Senator Gabriel, of course, is jumping up for joy for his people there in Caye Caulker. So lest it be misunderstood, Madam President, we are in support of a wastewater management system for Caye Caulker. But, Madam President, we absolutely have to look at the details. We have to question whether Belize is getting the best bang for our buck. BWSL, but also the fact that this loan is being guaranteed by the government and people of Belize is a concern that all of us must have. You know, Madam President, there is a reason. There is a reason why some time ago the law, the Finance and Audit Act, was reformed, if you will, to say that loans of this size must come to the National Assembly. There is a reason, there is a method for all of that. Because those who saw it fit, and we can go back to those tumultuous times, members who have been around know fully well that the government at the time was making all sorts of commitments, guaranteeing all sorts of loans and bad deals that forced the government itself. It was members of the cabinet, in fact, who led, you remember the G7? They led the charge to get legislation that would provide guardrails for these kinds of loans. So there is, in fact, a great need for, when these loans are being made, for all the documentation to be provided to these honorable houses. I know that this bill, in fact, has gone to the House of Representatives, where the leader of the opposition and her team supported insofar as Keokuk needs a wastewater management system in the very same way that we did this morning, but that a lot of the issues still were unresolved. So it is our duty, Madam President, to question the terms and conditions of this loan agreement that is being made to BWSL, but guaranteed by the taxpayers of this country. We are told, Madam President, that the loan is for $10 million US, and that there is a grant component, and we applaud that as well. There's no better money than free money, and so we applaud that portion, and we're told that BWSL will contribute another $750,000, and then the $10 million that we are borrowing will make it a grand total of $13 million. But what they don't tell us, Madam President, in these figures is what it's going to really cost us over the 25 years. What is this loan really going to cost the Belizean taxpayers over the 25-year period? Can the government and anybody on the government side provide us with an analysis, Madam President, a full lifetime analysis of this loan and what at the end of it we are going to be paying? We have not seen that. And I know we have some tremendous talent on that side, particularly in the financial guru, Senator Curry. So I'm hoping that he can rise up today and share with us some of the analysis and tell the Belizean people, Madam President, what exactly we are going to be paying for. What is the total projected cost of this loan over the 25 years, Madam President, including the interest rate and the credit fees? We want to be able to really scrutinize this loan, and those are valuable pieces of information that we need, Madam President. Also, if this is being borrowed by BWSL, backed by the government, and we have been convinced somehow, and maybe I shouldn't say we, because we have not been able to see, but the government has been convinced that BWSL can pay back this loan over time, then would it not be right, Madam President, in the spirit of those persons who, I reiterate, were a part of the cabinet, who insisted that we have a Finance and Audit Act that guarantees that the National Assembly provides support for this kind of borrowing? Would it not be in that spirit, Madam President, for them to share with us some of the financials that the government looked at from BWSL to determine that they are able to pay off a loan like this? Can they, Madam President, BWSL, service this debt from its own revenues? Or, because that's a key question. Because if they cannot service the debt, Madam President, Belizeans must know this, it then becomes the debt of the government and people of Belize. So we need to know what's BWSL's capability of servicing this debt. We also want to know, Madam President, what happens to the payment schedule if the credit fee of up to 0.75% annually on disbursed balances applies for an extended period. What happens? We are told, Madam President, that the loan carries a 66-month grace period. And we want to know what revenues will BWSL have generated during this 66-month grace. that will be able to help it to make the payments once the repayment schedule begins? These are all valid questions, Madam President. But what has come to us today is a simple bareback loan motion with some scattered details, but no meat. No meat. This is the borrowing of another $20-odd million that the Belizean people could possibly be saddled by. And when I say that, Madam President, when I say that the Belizean people could be saddled by, I am taking it from the angle that there may well be a default by the BWSL and that the government would be on the hook to pay. But if you think about it, the Belizean people may be on the hook either way, whether it is BWSL who pays or it is the government who has to pay if there is a default. Because you see, Madam President, BWSL will have to find the money from somewhere. And that is why, I don't know, I haven't looked at any financials from BWSL on my own lately, and it is a flaw that comes to mind because, again, the figures should have been presented to us and shared with us. What would have been good is if we could have heard something directly from the officials of the BWSL to the Honorable House of Representatives and to the Senate. I don't know if that was done to the Cabinet, but I know the Cabinet approved this. The Finance and Audit Act says the National Assembly must approve it, so give me all the details. Give us all the details. And that has not been forthcoming. So it may well be that BWSL is struggling. BWSL over the course of the 25 years may not find itself in a position to pay these loans. The truth of the matter is, I'm not saying that that is the case, but we don't know because we simply do not have the information. But if it is that BWSL finds itself in that position at any point, even especially after the grace period, because I'm hoping that they have some plan to start stockpiling some of these monies to be able to start making the payments after the 66 months. But the truth of the matter is that this burden can then be turned around because we don't see a plan from BWSL as to how they plan to service this debt. There were three amendments, three annexes, if you will, Madam President, that of contracts that was shared with us from various different areas. There was one dealing with operational concerns. And again, all of these agreements bring their own issues. Issues, Madam President, that have not been discussed and shared in this Honorable Senate. The questions which we have not had an opportunity to hear from neither the technical people from BWSL nor the technical people from the Ministry of Finance. Beginning with the first operational concern under that section, Madam President, connection rates. The financial viability of this water system, Madam President, depends entirely on how many households, how many businesses will actually connect to it. We don't know. They've not shared with us the study to say how many of these businesses, how many of these households exist and whether the connection, Madam President, will be mandatory or voluntary. And if it is going to be mandatory, under which law will you force people to connect? And if it is going to be voluntary, Madam President, are there some kinds of incentives that the government is going to put forward, or BWSL, sorry, is going to put forward to encourage people to connect? And then, Madam President, there are procurement concerns that we have as well. And you have to understand why we have this kind of concern for this administration. Because if there is a way to find a hustle, it is right through procurement. quite often is the case. None of these details shared with us, Madam President, speak about a procurement methodology. Will it be open to international tender? Will it be restricted? Or will it be a direct award for the implementation of this project, Madam President? We have no knowledge, no knowledge. These things matter. And I'm sure that all will appreciate that it matters because we have seen when, Madam President, there are these kinds of agreements made and the lending agency, in this case the IDB, says that there are certain thresholds, certain qualifications that entities that are providing whatever commodity, in this case the wastewater management system, they need to meet certain criteria in order to qualify to put in your bid. Will this procurement process, which we don't know about, exclude Belizeans by way of the fact that Belizean companies, by way of the fact that they may not have the kind of expertise that is needed? Will it then, what is the IDB saying about this? Is it limited to a list of people who would only be able to qualify from outside the country because of experience, because of what they've done with previous projects, because of what size that company is? And of course, those companies, we might have companies here in Belize that are, for us, large companies, but in the larger scheme of things under these lending agencies, might be pretty small and might not qualify. These are the kinds of questions, Madam President, that we need to be able to answer in order to say this is a good loan. And then there are also staffing preconditions, and we have to ask the question, are these staffing preconditions met already? Because BWSL, Madam President, under the agreements that were attached on, will be required, according to that agreement, Madam President, to hire 6 specialist staff, a sanitation specialist, a procurement support, a financial support, an environmental specialist, and a social specialist, and a climate change focal point. All of these people, the IDB says you must have these people in place. So we want to know, Madam President, has BWSL begun any of that recruitment? Do they have these people in place already? And what is the timeline if they don't have them yet? Because the people of Kikaka will be waiting. The 5-year disbursement, after it is disbursed, the 5-year disbursement period, the loan then starts to tick, Madam President. And any delays in meeting the preconditions mean delays in the construction, it means delays in the debt service revenues, and it means, Madam President, increased credit fee exposures. And then there are the environmental concerns, Madam President. And of course, we do not need to lecture this Honorable House at all about how important the environmental component is. I know that Dr. Kay, who I welcome once again as a senator this morning, Madam President, can easily give us weeks, months about how important Belize's environment is. And I'm reminded, Madam President, that Belize's Barrier Reef is on the list of World Heritage Sites. And that we need to protect it, and of course Kikaka is right out there on the reef. So the environmental concerns, Madam President, are crucial. So we have to ask the question, when you build a waste management system like this, where exactly, Madam President, will the treated wastewater be discharged? And what are the standards for that discharge? You know, my little son, Madam President, on Today is Wednesday. On Monday, he gets up very early, Madam President, and he wants to go outside in the yard, and he has a little pool. And of course, he harasses me to try to help him to fill the pool. Well, I tried to fill the pool on Monday morning very early, and the water was green. I don't know if the water was poisoned anywhere. You know, we're not too far in Lord's Bank from the Double Run treatment plant, but the water was green. And that's because, as far as I know, I visited that site. I see the amount of chlorine. I believe the water was clean and just discolored. But imagine if you are in Kikaka and you know they have a waste treatment plant out there, and your water starts getting brown or green or whatever color. So, in order to have the residents of Kikaka rest assured, Madam President, but also to have our environmental groups rest assured, tell us, what is the plan to deal with that treated wastewater? Where will it go after you treat it? In Belize City, we have a treatment pond, or where the water is released. The water not look too clean even after it is treated and released. We have some people who go fishing in there. I don't know that is safe to fish in. And I'm not getting into any kind of criticism of that, but I'm just if Belizeans would consider that pond as treated wastewater, it can give you some indication that what is deemed as treated wastewater may not be all that clean water that we might be thinking of. Although you can't get around it. If we are going to have residents on Kikaka and we are going to use water and there's going to be dirty water, then absolutely we have to do something with the water. But tell us, what is the plan? And tell us the standard. That's the most important thing. What standard are we looking at to purify this water if we are going to let it back out? Are we going to dig ponds like the one in Belize City, Madam President, or is it that they're going to release it back into the sea? And I think that is a crucial point. If that is what is going to happen, then everybody needs to be concerned, and it is our duty in this Senate today, Madam President, to demand to know what standards will be insisted on before the water is released back into the sea, if that is the plan. What are those specific quality parameters is what we're asking, Madam President, that the treatment plant must meet. And then, who will conduct the monitoring, Madam President? Is it BWSL themselves that will monitor whatever quality assurance for this discharge that needs to happen? Who is going to do it? Is it going to be them, or is it going to be some independent authority? I'm reminded of the situation that occurred in the New River. And there were entities that said, well, they're not me, and in fact, in some cases, the very entity that may have been causing the pollution were the ones telling you that, hey, it's not our entity that's causing that pollution. We want to make sure that whoever is responsible to check, to make sure that what is discharged back, Madam President, is up to standard, is an independent entity. So if it is BWSL, that's not good enough. And we must answer these questions before we borrow these monies, or we allow for the borrowing of the monies, Madam President. And I'm just getting into these details because they were shared, and I thank whosoever idea it was for it to be shared with us. But this is the kind of detail that we need. Because they never had to share the 3 contracts. But you did, and we appreciate it. But in the same vein, we want to be able to get to some of these details with the technical people before we recklessly approve a loan that will in fact cause this kind of damage to the environment. And then, Madam President, there is the issue of climate resilience. So the third component of the contract, Madam President, addresses climate resiliency. We note, Madam President, that there could possibly be another $500,000 US performance grant available to BWSL if it achieves the climate resilience target. And we welcome this, Madam President. That is a very good thing. However, we caution against treating climate adaptation as a box-ticking exercise designed to unlock grant funding. Kikaka, Madam President, we all know is a low-lying island. And, Madam President, the infrastructure being built today will face sea level rise. It is in an area where there is increased storm intensity. And we know as well, Madam President, that there is the great possibility of saltwater intrusion over the operational time of this system that will be built. And so, Madam President, we want genuine climate resilience built in, not just lip service, not just a retrofitting of things on paper. Madam President, I close by saying that we do support a water management system for Kikaka, but that we wish to place on record our concerns, and we ask, Madam President, that the government provides us with certain things that I've mentioned already, but I mention again now for emphasis and for clarity, Madam President. We'd like to see a full financial disclosure, a complete, Madam President, lifetime cost analysis of the loan, of the projected tariff impacts, of BWSL's debt serviceable projections. We wish as well, Madam President, to see a transparent procurement, all the contracts awarded, that these contracts be published, and that there is independent oversight and anti-corruption safeguards explicitly detailed. We would hate to know, Madam President, that we borrow all of this money only to lose a lot of it to corrupt practices. We ask, Madam President, as well, that there is some parliamentary reporting progress. We came here to ask the Parliament's permission to borrow this money. And I reiterate again, that did not just come like that, because somebody, and if we go back to the roots, the government itself, the cabinet itself, thought it was important for us to have the legislature be the check and balance for these types of loans. It's not the UDP that's saying so now. It's not the opposition that is saying so now. It is not those independent senators either who may well make the same call. It is what was put in place to have checks and balances, and so it is fair that we ask for reporting on these loans to the National Assembly on a periodic basis, Madam President. We want to ask as well, Madam President, for a complete environmental documentation. Let us see all of the IDB environmental and social assessments, Madam President, which I'm sure the IDB has asked of them. And asked of the government, asked of BWSL, whoever is the entity. Bring all the information here. We are the ones who approve the loans. We need all the details. And I mentioned earlier, Madam President, the issue of connectivity, because it matters. Who is going to connect to the system? Will that connectivity be mandatory or voluntary? Because clientele to BWSL matters if they are going to be in a position to pay back this debt. It matters. So, can somebody share those figures with us as well? And we would also want to know, because we saw where there is room for tariffs to be increased, water tariffs to be increased. And I know what the government people will say, well, we can't predict what is going to happen in the future, but that is important for you to give us some kind of, or not so much us, but the people of Kekaka themselves. What is it that you see as a projection for their increase in water rates as a result of this loan? Or what do you see could possibly be coming up in a few years' time that would affect their ability to pay? We must, Madam President, get the answers to these things in order for the opposition to be 100% on board with what the government is asking us to support today. When those answers are provided, Madam President, when the conditions that we've outlined are met, the opposition stands ready to support a project that can genuinely, especially my colleague here, who is the champion of Kekaka. We stand ready, Madam President, to support this kind of motion that would see a genuine transformation of the health of Kekaka as a community and the resilience of the overall marine environment of Belize. So we ask the government to make these changes. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Madam President, like my colleague, Senator Farber, I also rise in support of the motion. I think that it's important that Kekaka has the necessary sewer and wastewater system adequate to accommodate not only the residents of Kekaka, but also the visitors of Kekaka. As we know, Kekaka is a major tourist destination, and so it's important, I think, that the proper facilities be there. I heard my colleague Senator Farber mention several times, and just for record, Madam President, is that the Finance and Audit Reform Act did not come out of, it was not a initiative of the then cabinet in 2005. That came out of social partners' agitation at the time against what we thought was mismanagement of finances at the time. And so because the finances were going in a certain direction, we wrote and we actually started protests and said that we would not accept any type of additional taxes until significant financial reforms were undertaken. And so the chamber, along with the unions and other entities, we went through many nights, point by point, coming up with that Finance and Audit Reform Act. But it was us holding government to account that came out of that. I think the G7 were protesting internally what they felt were issues with how the finances of the country were run, but that did not lead to the Finance and Audit Reform Act. The Finance and Audit Reform Act came out of the social partners' agitation at the time, and so I think that's an extremely important correction for the records. Sorry? Yeah. Madam President, but like Senator Farber, I also think that the details are extremely important. For example, we're looking at $24.5 million in loan for Kekaka, and like I said, great initiative. I think we all accept that it's something needed. But when you try to assess the cost of it, and you wonder what would the cost per user be? How efficient can this be? Will the number of users in Kekaka in Kikaka require this amount. We don't have that type of information. All information that was provided was with respect to the loan itself and how it's supposed to be executed. But I looked through the documents and I did not get an idea of how many users would be in Kikaka, what the cost of putting in the system per user would be. That would have been a very good benchmark in terms of, for me to assess, the overall cost of a project like this. Additionally, Madam President, I also wanted to know, well, what would the cost of this be to over a period of time? I look at what they call is SOFR interest that's tied to this loan. But when you look at it, it talks about an overnight interest rate, but you don't really know what that interest rate is given the time. And so I think Senator Farber asked a similar question. I think at this point it's almost impossible to calculate because of the way that rate is set up. But it's important, Madam President, that we look at, like I said, great initiative, but we also have to look at execution and we have to look at accountability along with it. I've said this before in the Senate. I think that it's important. It would be great, actually, that when these loans are set up, that a certain component in there is set up for an audit of the project at completion. I remember when in one of my previous life, Madam President, as an auditor, I remember auditing as one of these projects in the Ministry of Works at the time, an hybrid loan. And so government was doing all these projects. I think at the time it was these, they were using youths who were, had issues at the time and they were trying to give them employment. And we came in and audited that project. And similarly, I think that it would be a great idea if at the end of these projects, at the end of these loan projects, that one, you'd have an audit, but as well, it would be great for this type of thing to come back to the National Assembly and a report be submitted to the National Assembly and say that this is the way that this project was executed. This was the cost of the execution. This was the overrun, or this was the excess of what was left over. We know we don't ever get that type of feedback. And so when you approve this loan, you really don't know when it's completed, what the issues were with execution, and what the potential costs was in relation to it. And so I think that we come and we approve all these, we approve these loans, but I think that it's important, I think, Madam President, that we maintain the accountability throughout, whether we're looking at loan funds coming in for a specific project or the way government is operating on a day-to-day basis. Madam President, I'm sure that the environmental factors would be covered within the scope of this project as well. I know that there are significant sensitivities when it comes to any impact on the environment with respect to execution of these projects, but I hope that those were also taken into consideration. Again, I didn't see that in the loan documents as well, but I would hope that those considerations were taken into effect. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Hector Guerra.
Madam President, fellow colleagues, Belizeans, a pleasant good morning. I rise in support of this IDB CLIMA loan and guarantee motion, and I support it for the following reasons. First, This motion addresses a real public health, environmental, and economic need. Key-Caulker is one of Belize's most important tourism communities, and its long-term viability depends on the health of its coastal and marine environment. The project is directed at improving coastal water quality, increasing access to safely managed sanitation services, and strengthening the adaptive capacity of vulnerable coastal marine ecosystems. Number two, this is not borrowing for borrowing's sake. The program finances a defined wastewater intervention. It is financing the construction and commissioning of a sewage system and treatment services. A wastewater treatment plant for Key-Caulker, supported by public awareness campaigns and institutional strengthening for BWSL. Number three, the benefits will be felt locally, but it really has a national importance. We all know that Key-Caulker is really one of the three engines that bring revenue within the tourism industry in our beloved Belize. The IDB states that the project will directly benefit 3,226 residents through wastewater collection and treatment services, an average of 1,238 daily tourists, and 145 commercial establishments. That means that this is not an abstract infrastructural project. It affects households, businesses, tourism workers, visitors, and the wider Belize economy. Fourth, the project protects Belize's tourism product. Key-Caulker sells a clean, healthy, and coastal experience. Wastewater management is therefore not merely a utility issue. It is a tourism competitive issue, a public health issue, and a marine conservation issue. Number five, the project protects a national environmental asset. The IDB project page describes the general objective as mitigating degradation of the coral reef barrier in Key-Caulker. For Belize, the reef is ecological infrastructure in that it supports marine life. It is tourism infrastructure in that it provides a place that our visitors, our locals want to visit, which is our barrier reef. And it provides climate resilience because when hurricanes come to Belize, when natural disasters come, the barrier reef provides a resistance to waves, and it provides a barrier for the residents of Key-Caulker. Treating wastewater before it damages coastal water quality is preventative and is really an investment that will benefit the residents of Key-Caulker. Number six, the sixth reason why I support this motion. The financing package is stronger than an ordinary loan because it includes grant support. The motion's US $12.25 million figure is explained by the US $10 million IDB loan plus $2.25 million in Global Environment Facility non-reimbursable investment financing. What does that mean? It means that roughly $2.25 million of this facility will be in the form of a grant. it means that 2.25 million will not have to be repaid. The wider program financing plan also identifies a local counterpart funding that BWSL will provide of roughly $750,000 US dollars. In addition, there is a separate IDB CLIMA grant, which again is another portion that BWSL will not have to repay, but that is conditional and performance-based. For the benefit of our Belizean listeners, the IDB CLIMA fund is a result-based climate fund, and it helps countries to reduce their debt burden by facilitating investment in projects that will protect against global warming and the risks that the increased warming of our global temperature is posing to countries like Belize. Number 7, the 7th reason why I support this motion. The IDB CLIMA elements creates incentives for results, not merely expenditure. The grant is linked to performance indicators, including effluent quality from the wastewater treatment plant, incorporation of climate adoption measures into BWSL water and sanitation projects above 500,000, and annual corporate reporting on climate resilience. This is a result-based structure. Madam President, I'd now want to address some of the concerns that have been raised in the debate so far. The first that I've heard that has come from Senator Farber is a concern that there is a repayment risk. But I'd want to flip that. There is a repayment risk, but the proper question is whether, my Belizeans, whether that risk is manageable. To that, I say yes for the following reasons. Number 1, BWSL is not a new and untested borrower. You know, in the many papers that have been shared, if you look at Annex A to the loan agreement, it provides and it records that BWSL has in fact executed several IDB loan agreements successfully. So the first point is BWSL is not an untested borrower and has in fact completed successfully several agreements and loans from the IDB. Number 2, the loan structure ensures that we have a 25-year term for repayment. It ensures that there are 39 semi-annual principal installments. It provides us with a grace period before principal payments become due. This is an affordable loan motion. Number 4, the project itself includes financial sustainability measures. So if one looks again at Annex A, it provides that BWSL will be tasked with ensuring that it provides to the IDB a sustainability plan to ensure that it can in fact meet its repayments. The point that I'm trying to bring across is that the loan isn't entered haphazardly. In fact, thorough due diligence has preceded this point, and the IDB is in fact content that BWSL will in fact be in a position to meet its financial obligations. The second concern that has been raised in the debate so far relates to the cost of the borrowing. If we look at Annex A, it provides the capital cost, which is roughly 13 million US dollars. So that is comprised and broken down as follows. 10 million will come from the IDB in the form of a loan. 2.25 million will come from the Global Environment Facility in the form of a grant. And BWSL will then provide local funding in the form of $750,000 US dollars. In terms of the debt costs, the rate, the interest that is attached to this loan is in fact variable, and at the current rate it is roughly 3.63%, but that of course can vary. The credit fee is 0.75% of the undisbursed balance. So that answers some of the costs and is readily available from the papers that have been shared. There is another point of concern that has been raised in terms of the debt burden and contingent liability for taxpayers. That concern is legitimate, which is why the guarantee is in fact before this National Assembly. But this is a productive, long-lived sanitation investment for a tourism and environmental asset. The loan is paired with grant financing, has a 25-year term and a 66-month grace period, and addresses costs Belize would otherwise bear, and this is the important part. If we don't address this, there will be costs that we would otherwise bear through pollution, through public health risks, and damage, reputational damage to our tourism product as a country. Another concern, the concern has been raised that government should not guarantee a loan for BWSL. But BWSL is the national water and wastewater utility, and the project serves a public sanitation and environmental purpose. Because the guarantee creates a contingent liability, the proper safeguard is parliamentary approval and continued oversight. I agree. Not rejection of the infrastructure. A point has been raised, a concern that Kekauke residents and businesses may face unaffordable connection costs. That, I say, is an implementation issue to monitor. Annex A specifically includes development of an updated tariff structure and a strategy for connectivity to the sewer system, including incentives, transition period, and communication. And I pause here to say that a part of the legislation to update tariff structures requires consultation, Belizeans. Meetings must be held before any tariff structure is updated. Belizeans must be informed before any tariff structure is updated. There is another concern that was raised in relation to the construction or treatment plant works that may create environmental harm. The first point is that the IDB itself classifies the project as Category B. What does that mean? It means that the project is will likely have local and short-term impacts for which mitigation is available. The draft conditions require ESMS and ESAP arrangements, meaning it requires environmental assessments to be undertaken before any construction commences. It requires stakeholder engagement, it requires disclosure, and an accessible grievance mechanism, so that if anyone has any complaint, there will be a mechanism in place through the IDB to raise those complaints. The last concern that I have heard so far and want to address relates to BWSL's capacity to execute this project. The loan condition requires appointment or contracting of technical, sanitation, procurement, financial, climate, environmental, and social specialists before, and I stress, before disbursements to ensure that this project is properly undertaken. Annex A that was provided in the package to all senators also notes BWSL's experience with IDB funded related operations. And so what I'm saying at this point is we hear the concerns, but the papers that are currently before us sufficiently address it. And I'm saying capacity is a matter to monitor, not a reason to reject the motion. Madam President, having said why I support this motion and having addressed some of the concerns raised thus far in the debate, I wish to end with this. If we are to develop our tourism package as a country, if we are to take care of our citizens in areas that are close and near to the sea, that are close and near to our beloved barrier reef, then we must ensure that the underlying infrastructure is in place. This is something that has long been an issue for the community of Kekaka, and it is this government, through BWSL, that is addressing it. And for that reason, Madam President, I support this motion. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Gabriel Zetid.
Madam President, good morning, colleagues. Good morning to Belizeans watching at home. First off, Madam President, I want to start off by saying that on this side of the opposition, like my colleague, lead opposition senator has stated before, we do support the motion. So I just want to say it again, we do support the motion, guys. In fact, as you know, I'm the caretaker of Belize Rural South, which includes Kekaka. I am from San Pedro, and we're very much excited about the purpose of this motion. What we've been stating, which we try to do, is to ensure that we can offer contributions to ensure that what we're executing in this Senate is done in a responsible manner. All right? So, from what I understand, BWS will be borrowing $10 million US. The Belizean government will be the guarantor of this loan, and the total project is about $13 million when we include the grants and the local counterparts are included, right? So, what is this meant to do? It is meant to build a sewage collection system and a wastewater treatment plant in Kekaka. Again, we support this. The purpose of this motion. I probably keep saying it over as I finish every paragraph. So when I looked at component one, the Keycarker sewage and wastewater treatment system. The Bean project is receiving about 11.745 million, or about 90.3% of the total funding. And this is going to construct, commission for public awareness, the tourism establishment campaign, and the training for BWS staff. And when I looked at now at component number 2, the improved BWS service is about 400,000 US. All this is being stated in USD currency. For a sustainable sanitation business model, which is to update tariff structures. We get that, Senator Guerra. So it is to update the tariff structure and a strategy to get the household and the businesses connected to the sewer system. Component number 3 talks about the climate and environmental institutional strengthening, which is about 225,000, again USD, to help BWS include climate and biodiversity risk in the projects and the project designs and reporting. So the good, I will highlight the good and then I'll add my cautions. Again, we support the motion. This project can definitely improve the infrastructure, which is definitely needed in Keycarker. We're not taking that away. You know, as it has been stated previously by my colleague and other senators, Keycarker depends on tourism. It depends on the sea, clean water. And so when we have poor wastewater management, it can damage the marine ecosystem. It can hurt the tourism product and affect the public health, adding to already an environment that is under threat by this government with the amount of dredging that is happening. So, the project stated objective is to improve the coastal water quality, support the tourism, protect the vulnerable marine ecosystem, and increase the access to safe sanitation. I say this only to reiterate that we support the motion from this angle. I think if we didn't, something would definitely be wrong with us. And to anyone who would try to allude that we don't support the motion, man, who would not support sanitation, clean water, or marine protection? Again, the main concept, the purpose, we support. Now what we have to look at is the debt, something which I will translate again, loans, the tariff, and the accountability. At the end of the day, guys, this is still a loan. Even though the Belize Water Service Limited is the one who is borrowing to execute this. At the end of the day, it is the government of Belize who's acting as the guarantee, which means whichever way you want to paint it, the Belizean people is carrying the risk. The project includes an updated tariff structure to come. We cannot shy away from the questions that will be asked when this will affect the consumers in Key-Corker. Already adding to what we're currently living, one of the highest costs of living. So you can expect these questions to be asked. What will increase, or what would the rates be? Will it be increasing gradually so that we can be able to meet our repayment? Third, the project admits that connections to serve the system is critical. It says without connectivity, right? The intended result may not be achieved. Now, we will see I will stress that when we looked at the total interest that is to be paid on this project, or in fact, if we looked at the total amount, even though we're borrowing 10 million USD, the total project, we're looking at 13 million USD, 26 million Belize. And we know the track record. We see the misappropriation of funds, money going missing. The objective, the purpose, I'm not against. And I align with the opposition, the lead senator, my colleague, the Honorable Patrick Faber, that whether quarterly, semi-annually, or annually, we should be getting a report. When we're asked to approve these loans, at the very least, we should be getting back a report on how these monies are being spent. And I'm looking forward to the bill that was brought from the House of Representatives, by the way. There I will give more into this. But focusing on this, the Belizean people, one of the things that I've received already via text is the Belizean people still have to pay BWS for the consumption. When we get water, electricity, we still have to pay those utility companies, and as you know, rates have been increasing. And it seems at times that there's no type of incentive, no type of keeping the people in mind, but yet, on the other hand, we're, as a Belizean people, as the government of Belize, we're backing this up. That is where I believe the issue lies. Interest and acting as the guarantee. Madam President, one of the things I will stress again, we support the motion. If we can ensure that the funds are properly spent, if we can ensure that this project will not pass its budget, its proposed budget, if we can ensure that we meet all the requirements so that we can get those incentives, if we can ensure that we get an accountability, something this government seems to be allergic to, on how the money is being spent. Again, we support the motion. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Dr. Elmaki.
Thank you, Madam President. I wasn't going to make any interventions on this particular motion, but having listened to my colleagues, I feel that, well, wearing the environmental hat, of course, that Senator Faber has mentioned, and also our hat representing the NGOs, I think that, yes, no one would dispute the necessity for this system. And in fact, as Senator Guerra pointed out, I'm super happy to see that this is actually being accompanied by grant funds from the Global Environmental Facility and the IDB, both which are very reputable institutions that have really high standards when it comes to their social and environmental safeguards. Both of which also have recourse in terms of grievances and the ability for the public or anybody affected by the loans that they make, you know, whether those loans have affected those individuals negatively, there is recourse and tribunals to which these can be taken. Of course, I think that, you know, for the average Belizean, that may not necessarily be something that they're aware of, and so perhaps, you know, the intervention here is just to publicly state for the record that when it comes to these loans, especially when they come from bodies like the Inter-American Development Bank or when we get grants, these bodies do have places that we can go to make our voices heard on something that may be going well, but also something that may not be going well. And one of the things that I would say is, you know, the grant funds clearly have key performance indicators that necessitate that there are certain environmental conditions that are met in order for those grant funds to be disbursed in terms of the quality of the water. So those are very good safeguards in there. And I think wearing, you know, my environmental hat, my request to our government colleagues here would be support for a strengthened system for environmental clearance, because I think that, you know, like everything, you know, as we like to say, the devil is always in the details. And so while these loans and projects do require that we undertake processes of environmental clearance, for example, those processes are only going to be as robust as our laws and regulations, you know, as robust as those are. And one of the things that from our community, we have been working with the Department of Environment and the technocrats for the government, has been a review and significant consultations and recommendations on environmental regulations for this country. It has been clear that there's a real need to strengthen those and to strengthen that process, and also to strengthen the capacity of the people that are preparing these environmental and social impact assessments. And, you know, I think that work that has been put into reviewing the existing regulations and making those recommendations, it would be wonderful if our colleagues on the, you know, on the government aisle would really help us to champion those so that we can move that process forward, because there's been significant work. And I especially take this opportunity that our Attorney General is today here serving as leader of government business, because those regulations, as I say, are, you know, we really need them fast, and they would really strengthen this type of project and the outcome of these loans. And my second intervention is really to just reaffirm what our colleague Senator Herrera has mentioned, and as well Senator Zetina, that the reporting back mechanisms are important. I think that the interventions clearly point out to sometimes the general distrust of government. And I think there's an opportunity here because, sometimes whether founded or unfounded, that distrust may be there because, whoever is in power controls all this money. So let us make it so that, we do not have to have that distrust. Let us have some sort of report back mechanism, particularly to this chamber that makes decisions on approving these motions. And that would be really my request of the colleagues here today that have the ability to champion some of those reporting back mechanisms and strengthening of our current environmental regulations that, as I mentioned, we have already made significant recommendations to, and that I believe there's a lot of agreement between the technical people and civil society and others on those, but we need champions to bring those forward. So thank you, Madam President, and yes, I fully support that this is a really important endeavor for us to undertake as a country for Caye Caulker and our barrier reef and for climate resilience. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Sheena Pitts.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. Madam President, would you permit me? I have to rely on my device this morning and clumsily have it here closest to me. I start by saying that I will not stand before you to fangirl fawn like my colleague from the government side, Senator Guerra. I appreciate when in a sitting like this, I can actually recognize when debating is done. And I saw that from Senator Farber, Senator Herrera, Senator El McKay, and my colleague, Senator Zetina. Because you see, in debate, I'm sure you would appreciate, especially Senator Cowie, you listen to what the speaker has said before you. And when you rise, it is to rebut those things. What you don't do is come, and I will not say the rest. And what I like about you, Senator Cowie, is that you're always sitting there, quiet, taking notes, and when you rise to your feet, you are pointed and surgical to respond and rebut only to those things that matter right for debate. And so, Senator Dr. Kaye, I like that you have summarized what rarely senators before me have said, save Senator Guerra, in that we will not oppose the project because we support the project. It is good, it is sound. What we're saying is that they're strengthening, like you said, is that there is some, as you call it, reporting back, and you classify distrust, which is the requirement or what should found the reporting back. My colleague, Senator Farber, has put it thus: let's get it right from the beginning. And here we are in the National Assembly considering a loan motion that we have an opportunity to get it right from the beginning. You mentioned that these bodies that lend, they have a mechanism that we can go to if we are aggrieved. I wonder, aloud, for the benefit of the record, how many times have the average person in the Belizean society actually know about that and have used it? And what benefit is it when the house don't get out of the stable, we don't borrow the money, and we're committed to the terms of a loan agreement? And so I rise, Madam President, to share what getting it right from the beginning look like. or should look like, and I fully associate myself with my colleague, Senator Farber, Herrera, Guerra, Dr. Kaye. I don't find, though, that there is much I can address from Senator Guerra. The point about the terms and conditions of the loan agreement, I find, is that there is no fixed concessional rate. It is tied to general conditions, including a SOFR-based interest, SOFR, bank cost of funding, lending, spread, and possible alternate base rate determination if the bank changes the interest rate basis. So for me, Madam President, and for everyone, what should be appreciated is that if there is ever a time we say red flag, this is a red flag, because we're going into a loan agreement without any appreciation as to what the interest rate will be. Belize is now locking in a interest rate that we don't know what it will be. It is accepting variable rate exposure unless later converted, and for a small economy and a utility whose revenues depend on tariff, that risk matters. There is also a credit fee on the undisbursed balance, capped at 0.75% per annum, beginning 60 days after the signature. So if execution delays, BWSL may still pay for money not yet used. Another feature in the agreement is that interest begins to become payable 60 days after signing. So even though payment is deferred and we have an extended payment period, we begin to pay interest whether or not the project starts, whether or not we don't get all the money, interest is payable. And so for me, that is a bit troubling. It may be a common feature in these institutions. This kind of agreement is standard. I would want to raise it to predatory, but I must be responsible in appreciating that in the commercial environment, this is not necessarily predatory. Save and accept. Comfortably resting there demands, like Dr. Kaye said, we look at strengthening reporting back so that we can dispel the distrust. The sovereign guarantee, we've seen it before, but it creates public exposure. And like Senator Farber has said, we are not informed as to the borrowing power of BWSL and the repayment power of BWSL. What I can say is this, that what BWSL has done recently, and Belizeans can identify with this, you have water bill unpaid, $5, $10, $15, they disconnect, and you charge they charge a $25 reconnection fee. Well, you know why I'm aware of this, Senator Denison? My firm pays bill, and my firm pays water bill for a certain amount. It never changes. And that don't know a lot of money, because we know they run hotel at the firm. But when... They run hotel at some firm? Listen, the 12 o'clock hour and the Rosavina soap. Anyway, when the bill came, and for some inadvertent reason, it wasn't paid, and the water was disconnected, that is when I learned, and mind you, the habit of the firm is to pay in advance, and so the amounts are drawn down over time. And I'm telling you, Madam President, as Belizeans experience. For $10.51, the bill was the service was disconnected, and $25 had to be repaid. For the life of me, as a standard, they tell you have to put a deposit in addition to the reconnection fee. You pay the bill in order to get back service.
That does not help your argument.
No, but I am showing, no. Because this is already the modus of a company which is, in my view, oppressive to Belizean people, and what this loan agreement is not doing is showing us or having us appreciate any kind of comfort that the tariff conditions that Senator Farber raised and Senator Zetina raised and Senator Herrera raised and agreed to. How will that affect the translation on the consumer? My God, so you can tell me it's $1 where I get disconnected for. And when you are to pay, it's going up higher. And what is important here is that we should be able to be comfortable in understanding that BWSL will not incorporate or not incorporate any shift in the burden to satisfy this loan on the backs of the Belizean people. And further, ultimately, that the government, should BWSL default, we still bear the brunt of the stake. So I think that is a real concern. As I've said, the variable SOFR-based interest rate, I searched this agreement to determine what is the number for interest, and I could not. I found a list of conditions that the bank could use to identify the interest, the SOFR-based interest. And that varies from day to day, year to year, and I find that over time what this can amount to is that a loan today for about $13 million can be a loan in 5 years for $20 million, $25 million. And the fact that that moves in terms of interest rate and how we pay back is uncomfortable. There is in Annex B, an additional $500,000 IDB CLIMA grant, and it's not factored into the whole the total referenced, but it's an additional $500,000. But what that says, like you picked up, Dr. K, is that it is conditional based on performance. And so what is there that we have in place to ensure that we will perform to avoid a bank exercising a prerogative not to advance the grant? I ask your indulgence, Madam President, because I don't want to go through the text of the annex, save and accept that there is independent verification that is required, and this is an opportunity, like Dr. K mentioned, that we could use to ensure that those things are in place. So as much as I would want to call or characterize the loan as predatory, I cannot, because like I've said, this is classic commercial loans, and the IDB development loan this one is with a clear public purpose and some grant blended finance features. But when I move away from characterizing it as predatory, I still find myself able to characterize it as financially asymmetrical, because The benefits are public. The risks are carried by BWSL consumers and ultimately Belizean taxpayers through the sovereign guarantee. The urgent infrastructure needs, Madam President, I don't think it should sufficiently justify weak borrowing discipline. And a good project can still be financed on terms that are too risky or too opaque or too burdensome. And that's where I find my position in relation to the loan. And the public interest should be support the project, demand renegotiation or clarification of the financial terms before binding Belize to a sovereign guarantee. And in terms of what we may be able to demand before approval, I associate myself with Senator Farber that's listed things like tariff, impact assessment, and what have you, so I won't go through that in any great details. In relation to Annex A, there is no, like I've said, there is no question as to what it is and how good it is. But the point is that the engineering and environmental objectives appear strong, and the concern arises from, like you said, Dr. K, implementation, affordability, future tariffs, institutional capacity, and the fact that the project creates a long-term operational obligation that may outlive the loan proceeds. And the tariff increase concern at paragraph 2.04 of Annex A states that the component will contain the preparation of a management sustainable business model for sanitation services, development of updated tariff structure, and the development of a strategy for connectivity to sewer system. And that's important in Annex A. And it signals sewer charges will likely be introduced. Tariffs may increase. Consumers may ultimately fund operations and debt service. And so the question for Parliament is, what will happen to households, small businesses, tourism operators, low-income residents? Will the tariffs rise, and by how much? And the documents provided, and we applaud being supplied with documents, the documents don't address or answer those questions. And so associating myself with Senator Farber before me is that we should really require tariff impact assessment or the social affordability study, a PUC review. We have not included the regulatory body in our considerations that they should play a role. And I say this because some years ago I was involved in litigation that concerns water, consolidated water at the time, and PUC, and they were having issues with the treatment plant. And so I'm sensitive to the necessity for a project like this, but I'm also sensitive to appreciating that there are blowbacks, and that the PUC, they should have a role in, like you said, Dr. K, ensuring that there are things in place for this. The other caution or concern is paragraph 2.04 provides that a strategy for connectivity to the sewer system, which will include incentives, transition period, and communication. And on the face of it, it sounds benign, but it raises a critical question. Is connection being mandatory here? And if so, will households pay for that? Who is paying for the connection cost? What happens to existing septic systems, and what happens to residents who cannot afford a connection? So, and the reason why this is real is, I'm sure colleagues might be aware, say for example, you get a piece of land and it's far off somewhere. If you want to go and develop your property, what BL is telling you is that you have to pay to get electricity there, and what you have to pay is so much that people end up walking away from trying to develop property that is far out or in undeveloped areas. So conversely with this is, what is going to happen when connectivity becomes mandatory. If connectivity, as envisaged by paragraph 2.04, is mandatory, who will pay for it, and how will the transition be, or what segue will be done between the old system into the new system? The future operational costs, Annex A focuses heavily on construction and less attention is given to long-term operation. Paragraph 2.02 notes training, operation, and maintenance and startup, but wastewater plants aren't expensive to operate. And so questions not answered are like annual operating costs, electricity costs, replacement costs, sludge disposal costs, and future capital replacement needs. So we could successfully build infrastructure, but later struggle to maintain it. And this is not new to us in Belize, you know. Remember when we started getting stoplights? We get one, then we get two. And when the stoplights stopped working, it was for months because we don't have people in home to fix the stoplight. So the argument here is, we're building this thing, can we maintain it? Do we have capacity to maintain it? Because this is a common issue throughout the Caribbean. And whether that maintenance will lend itself to the increase in the burden of taxpayers affording the benefit of the plant, and or the ability of BWSL to maintain the repayment obligation where they might incur additional costs borne out of that. The BWSL expanding mandate, paragraph 2.05 states, this component will finance actions to support the institutional strengthening of BWSL to identify, design, and implement sanitation investments. BWSL is a water utility, and the project expands its water waster role. So what I am curious is, does BWSL have sufficient technical expertise, staffing, and wastewater management experience? And the annex assumes that the answer is yes. But we should seek evidence that it does. And there is no material before us that it does. Senator Faber and Dr. Kaye both suggested that we should have some, and Senator Herrera, we should have some reporting. And reporting should include climate and biodiversity reporting obligations that paragraph 2.05 introduces. And those are positive objectives, but they create recurring compliance obligations. So what is there for us to appreciate that those obligations, compliance obligations, may increase burden on use of the funds and divert it to reporting, monitoring, or consultancy work rather than the core service delivery. And I'm saying this because the balance between the two must be carefully monitored. And this is something I'm still thinking about. I'm not certain that this is one of those straight numbers, questions that you can answer, Senator Cowie, but the project is concentric to Kekauke. BWSL customers nationwide, however, could bear the cost, and the government guarantees the debt nationally. Now, we could say that that's no real concern because it benefits our people and we should share it. But it would be a real help to see whether or not, if there is a cost to bear, or where there is a cost to bear, because there will be a cost, what that cost is, and whether that cost, BWSL is saying that the cost will be borne primarily only by Kekauke residents, or that that cost will be shared nationally, that every Belizean will enjoin the government in bearing the burden of ensuring that Kekauke has this project. I simply don't know. So, and what Annex A does not say is whether or not there are cost overruns, no contingency framework, any revenue forecast, no estimate of future income, no debt service analysis. We heard Senator Faber on that. No explanation of how repayments will be funded, affordability analysis, environmental liability, or connection costs. In paragraph 2.04 of Annex 8 says development of updated tariff structure, and I went through that already. So, Madam President, what I'm saying is, and you know, if I had had the interest to exert the extra energy to translate it to Spanish for my friend Senator Guerra and our Spanish-speaking Belizeans, I would have, but I would rest in English and Creole. UDP supports the project. UDP like the project. We want the project. Where we say is that there are things that we can do in the beginning portion to ensure that we're borrowing responsibly, and it should not be reflected on the record. Nobody's speech should be spliced to try to suggest that the opposition does not support the project. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Reverend Louis Wade.
Thank you, Madam President, and good morning, colleagues. It's still morning, but just barely. I rise to support this very important loan motion, and also to celebrate with the people of Kekauke that they will be receiving much needed infrastructure development. I promise them. This is not my doing, I must say. I've been lobbying for other things, including in the area of education. I am not a political animal. However, let me rephrase that. I am a political animal, and a very fierce one. I am not a partisan political animal. And that's why I think it is important to walk the streets and to talk to the people and to be involved in the national life of its citizens, so that should we be given the opportunity to represent the nation in a place like this, we can also, beside the partisan political dialogue, know what the needs of the people are. And so I'm fortunate in this particular case of Kekauke to have walked the streets some months ago as we supported the population in their request to have a referendum and have the voice of the people be represented in a most important matter, where they were being asked by some to support the legalization of marijuana, and in return there would be benefits, infrastructure benefits. And who doesn't want infrastructure benefits for their community, especially if they believe that they contribute heavily to national development, and in particular tourism, the way that Kekauke does. And so we were out there to support them and sharing with them that we felt that there could be national development, there could be community development and infrastructure development at that, without it necessarily having to be tied to a very specific request or compromise. And so here we are. I am happy, and I celebrate with the people that $12.5 US have been identified to bring major improvement to the community. Because this was one of the things that they pointed out. There is some development. They pointed out the community center. They pointed out a medical center on the small island of Key-Caulker. But I was there during the rains, and we saw the flooded streets, the lack of drainage, the intermingling of sewage due to septic tanks and so on that they have, mingling with the water that many of them had to walk through so that they could continue to access school, continue to access their businesses. And so if we walk the streets, and I'm glad, as I said, that I spent a couple of months there to see what the people went through and are going through, because rain season to start again. All of that water mixed with sewage goes from the streets into the sea, which is near the barrier reef. And so this is literally environmental development that will now ensure that sewage mixed with water does not go directly into the Caribbean Sea, which is right next to our national asset of the barrier reef, but it is going to be properly treated, etc. And so, having been there, having spoken to the people, having been door to door, this is a welcomed development that I know the people would support. And so, as I said, I rejoice with them. It is it is pro-environmental. It improves waste management. The people have been asking for this, among other things. It is no strings tied to the people of that particular community. Key-Caulker is a small community, and for what they contribute financially to the entire nation through tourism, I believe that the community should have been farther along. So here is a tangible way that the community of Key-Caulker can be farther along. The expense of that project cannot be carried by Key-Caulker alone. So I don't believe that there should be an argument that the returns or the payment or the repayment should come from Key-Caulker alone. Because one, it is a small community. Number two, there will be small communities throughout the country that will need national assistance to get them to develop to the level that we enjoy in larger communities. So it has to be carried by all of us. And why not when Key-Caulker is one of the primary contributing communities to the economy of Belize through tourism? So I believe that the sharing of this burden nationally, including through a sovereign guarantee, including BWSL spreading it out across the entire nation, will benefit not only Key-Caulker but all of us, because most of us, that is the community that we also go to when we want to take a 1 week or 2 week break. Key-Caulker is the place. As it relates to the interest rate calculated, I did have my questions as it relates to what that number is. Yes, I am more accustomed to when it asks about interest rates that we get a number instead of an explanation. But going to the explanation, I'm fairly satisfied. that the SOFR, let me see where, okay, yeah, that the SOFR interest rate is, one, unmatched transparency. Number two, produces a lower base interest rate. And number three, contains high institutional credibility. In Belize, we are tied to the US dollar. And so countries like ours benefit from the SOFR opportunity. The countries for which there would be a greater risk are countries that are not tied to the US dollar, and so there may be fluctuations. But in any event, I noticed that there is also a clause that says that it is possible in the future to shift to a fixed rate, if that is so needed. And so it is an IMF loan, I think, IDB loan. So the buffers are there. The people of Kikaka will benefit greatly, and by extension, the nation of Belize. And I think that if we are to see loans continue to pass through the House, they ought to be more of this kind. And with that, I thank you.
I recognize Senator Glenfield Dennison.
Obliged, Madam President. I rise in support of the loan motion, not because I understand SOFR and macroeconomics and IDB and credit fees and those sorts of things, because I do not understand any of those things. The Holy Bible. So, what I do know and understand is that there are very hard-working Belizean people at BWSL. And it is my firm belief in those people who wake up early in the morning and put on boots or shoes and go to work, morning after morning, day after day, to contribute to the development of this country in such a fundamental way. Madam President, a younger version of myself wanted to be in politics, and I decided not to. When a friend of mine said to me that when you are in government, it is your responsibility to ensure that your people have water and sewage. That, Madam President, that scared me, because I don't want that responsibility at all. It is a heavy one. And so I support any and all efforts towards ensuring that the people of Belize in 2026 have adequate water supply and sewage system throughout this entire country, whether or not they contribute to the economy and tourism, or their sewer system is a pipe into the mangroves in Belize City. So, Madam President, the people of Kikaka are also like the people at BWSL. In fact, a large percentage of them are entrepreneurs who bear the risk of their entire business going under because of lack of water supply or proper sewage facilities. And it's not a small thing to take for granted the ability to turn on a tap and get water. It is a privilege that many Belizean people still don't have in 2026. And so I take this time to applaud the efforts of the Ministry of Rural Transformation, who's doing its best to ensure that the rural communities are getting access to water supply, because it is a gargantuan task. And so, if you've ever been to Keycocker, because some of us haven't been, you will appreciate that it's not Gumagarugu water that comes out of the pipe. It's a little, what do you call it, Senator Herrera? At least salty, right? It does a little brackish. Like I wouldn't drink it, right? So I applaud efforts being made to improve the living conditions of the Keycocker residents in such a basic human needs way. This piece of legislation supports the right to a clean environment. Support is underpinned by human dignity, where the people of Keycocker are made to dispose of their waste in ways that some of us would cringe at. And it's not only them. Like, you know the people, right, Senator Faber? The ones that they talk about whose toilet goes to a pipe that goes to nowhere, or who are left to hurt. Some people use plastic bag, you know. This is 2026. Some people sewer system is a Chinese shop plastic bag. So bring more loan motions to improve sewer systems throughout the entire country, and you'll have this senator support all day, every single day. Of course, I don't shy away from the points that I know my friend in front of me will respond to in relation to the questions that were already raised. I won't repeat them. I will await his enlightened contribution. And repeat as I close, Madam President, that with the appropriate accountability safeguards that were mentioned by my colleagues, with the call for more information in relation to the ability of BWSL to repay, I support the loan motion because further to believing in the people of Kekauke and the people at BWSL, I believe in the people of Belize, and I believe that they want a better water treatment system for all citizens. And I agree that they would not mind sharing the responsibility of ensuring that a subgroup of our population gets a better water treatment system. So with that, I yield, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Christopher Cowie.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. This morning I rise in support of this motion, this loan and guarantee motion for $10 million. I won't try to keep you long on this. I think it's important to recognize effectively the unanimous support of this motion before the Senate. But concerns have been raised, and I think for the most part they require or necessitate some clarification more than anything else. With respect to the process in getting to this loan being brought here, I think it's useful to appreciate partly what Senator Wade spoke to. In effect, identifying the ills, the affliction, the needs, and prioritizing what those are. With respect to our realities at Kekauke, what they experience in terms of electricity, of water, of wastewater, the challenges that they face. But in addition to that, the impact that the island of Kekauke has on the entire economy of Belize. We look at, we keep speaking about how tourism is so important to our country, our economy. But when we look at San Pedro and Kekauke in particular, I don't know the specific number, but it's between 60 and 70% of all tourists that visit Belize visit San Pedro and Kekauke. It's easy. We have over 500,000 tourists now a year visiting our country. So it would not be unreasonable estimate to say that at least 50,000 tourists visit Kekauke every year. So while Senator Guerra spoke about the 3,000 persons and Senator Herrera raised concern about user costs, the per user costs, certainly it's not only the residents, those 3,000 plus residents, but also the 50,000 or 10% of our tourists that are impacted directly by an investment of this nature. If we do nothing, what happens? I can't give a causative position, but certainly there seems to be a correlation where there is heavy activity and tourism activity, economic activity, and the barrier reef and the healthiness of the barrier reef. I think if you look at the barrier reef along Ambergris Key and going down towards Key Caulker, and I don't know, Senator Kay, if she can attest to this, but the healthiness is certainly being challenged significantly in those areas of heavy population. Theories certainly arise in connection with that, but effluents from these islands have been attributed or are being attributed to the impact on the healthiness of the reef. So it's important to look at the environmental implications of not doing something. We rely on the reef, we rely on the pristine nature of our marine resources, including but not limited to the reef. So it's incumbent on us to conserve, to protect our marine resources. And that's why you see this loan being an IDB CLIMA loan, because it is related and tied in with the environment and environmental protection and conservation. So that, I think, looks at the needs, the ills, and how do we address those. So identifying this approach, the wastewater treatment plant, the development of that plant at Key Caulker looks directly at addressing those ills. So that analysis has been done even before saying we'll do a loan. That analysis was done involving and including IDB and IDB consultants, etc. So a lot of work has been put in even before getting to this point, making sure it is something that makes sense, it is a good investment, and ultimately in this case a good loan for BWS to make. Now, looking at the finance side of it, to clarify, yes, it is a $10 million loan accompanied by a $2.25 million grant, but there's, as part of that IDB CLIMA program, Belize, by the way, being one of the first to be participating in this IDB CLIMA program, launched, I think it was last year, by the IDB. Up to $500,000 of the $10 million can also be rebated or in effect be reduced. So with the meeting of KPIs, the key performance indicators, so in effect we would have the benefit of $12.25 million while at the same time paying interest and repaying only $9.5 million. So we would, in effect, be paying interest on only $9.5 million. So when you look at the numbers over time and all of that, and accounting for the overall economic benefit of that $12.25 million, we have to look at the different fees and interest rates. So Senator spoke about the credit fee for one. Credit fee applies on the undisbursed amount of the loan. So why it's there is in effect to incentivize the disbursement, the implementation of this project. So the sooner you get to full disbursement, and the sooner that the credit fee goes to zero. This contemplates an implementation period of roughly 5 years. So that credit fee on the undisbursed amount of 0.75% will apply while that disbursement continues. So it actually is at its highest in the beginning and then reduces over time to zero. As far as the interest rate now, I know Senator Pitt spoke about whether it's predatory or asymmetric, but just to clarify, the interest rate applies only on the undisbursed balance of the loan. So the credit, on the disbursed balance of the loan. The credit fee applies on the undisbursed sum, and the interest rate applies on the disbursed sum. So in the beginning, there won't be any interest because there's no disbursement. But by the time of the, let's say, the end of the implementation period of 5 years, then the loan would be fully dispersed, and so the maximum interest rate would be at that point in time. And then as the amortization payments are made, then the interest payable in effect comes down. Now the calculation of the interest rate is done using the SOFR rate. The SOFR rate is what is abbreviated for the Secured Overnight Financing Rate. That is effectively a market rate, a secured overnight financing rate. So that's effectively a market rate that the best AAA financial institutions and businesses, that's the lowest rate they effectively can get on the market. It is a variable rate, so it varies over time. And as Senator Wade spoke about, the loan terms, the loan agreement does provide for the conversion from a variable rate to a fixed rate. Usually though, the fixed rate is higher than the variable rate. So this is basically the lowest rate you can get. This current SOFR rate is around 3.65% per annum, 3.65% per annum. In the way that the interest rate is defined, you're basically looking at the SOFR rate plus what they call an applicable lending spread. That applicable lending spread is around 0.8%, and I think there's a funding, a small, like 0.4% funding margin. So the overall interest rate with everything in it is about 4.8, or a little, just about 4.8%. So in effect, the loan amount, which would be the 10 million or the 9.5% that you if we get the IDB CLIMA grant to kick in, then you're paying like 4.8% on the 9.5 million. So if you want to do the payments out over the entirety of the 25 years, because you have a 5-year grace period and a 20-year to pay down the loan, then it's the principal amount, which is the 10 million, and then the interest you're paying over that period of time. On a 20-year basis, at 9.5 million, you will add up over 20 years to about 5 million, roughly 5 million in interest, and then the 10 million in the loan, or the 9.5 in the loan. So that's the full breakout of all the total payments. One thing that is particularly interesting is that Belize, if Belize were to go on the market, not with IDB, but on the open market to borrow, Belize has what you call a heightened sovereign risk. So the cost of capital for Belize to go other than with these multilaterals is a lot higher. That's why Belize, whether under UDP or under PUP administrations, they've avoided going into the open market to borrow because the cost of financing would be a lot higher. Huh? I would have said UDP has, I don't want to get into it, but I could get into it. I could get into it. If you want to get into it, I'll get into it. Maybe I'll leave that to the end. But what I'm saying is the cost of capital on the open market for Belize, given Belize's sovereign risk, although that sovereign risk has been coming down over the years, is still high. So if we proceed and secure this loan, we actually have a net present value gain of roughly $6 million right off the bat. To explain that, in small change, okay, take the loan proceeds, you get the gain of the loan proceeds, add in the gain of the grant, so you're at 12.25 million, and then you have to subtract the payments that you have to make over time. Now, what is the present value of those payments that you have to make over time brought to the present? You apply a discount rate. And what's that discount rate? That discount rate is impacted by the sovereign risk that Belize has. So if you discount the sovereign rate, those payments by an applicable range, which typically is applied in Belize for future payments, is between 10 and 12%. Let's use the lower amount. If you use the 10%, that is what gets you that 6 million net present value. You basically, at half, we have a net gain of roughly $6 million US by just signing on this because of the concessionality of the interest rate that we are getting under this multilateral agreement, as well as the grants that come in as part of this agreement. So all around, financially, this makes a lot of sense. We gain by signing on this dotted line. Now, in terms of procurement, I think if you look at page 43 of the general conditions, it speaks to how you have to do procurement. IDB, just like the other multilateral banks like CDB and World Bank, they have their own procurement procedures, procurement policies, procurement procedures. And they won't disburse money unless you're following those procedures. So this is not something that the government or Belize Water Services on its own will decide who I'm going to give this contract to or how I will give this contract. No, this has to follow the procurement policies and procedures of the IDB. And that is established, that is applied in all the project loans that Belize gets from the IDB, and what all the other countries that get loans from the IDB, that's the procurement policy and procedure that is applied. Transparent, open, and fair. So I think there is no need to have a concern on that. But I do appreciate that there is the desire to have reporting, the ability to in effect audit or see what's going on. I'm sure Senator Faber would be familiar, but when you do these project loans, these multilateral lenders, they themselves do their audits. They have periodic audits, at least annually, if not semi-annually, where they bring down their people and review the implementation of the loans. Implementation has always been a challenge, not only in Belize, but in most other places, but certainly in the Caribbean as well. It's actually peculiar that in terms of implementation, so far as the CDB is concerned, Belize is actually a model for the rest of the Caribbean in the way that we implement, because we tend to implement much faster than our Caribbean brothers. That said, there are always delays in implementation, and that always remains a challenge to make sure that we minimize those delays. But implementation, in that process of implementation, these multilateral lenders, including IDB, send their teams to audit the process of implementation and actually do reports. Now, I don't know if those reports are public, but perhaps that may be something that could be explored, whether those reports are made public so that everybody knows what's happening with each of these projects, whether they're going according to plan, whether they're delayed, whether there are any specific problems that arise. But I wouldn't say that we need to try and reinvent the wheel and start a new process when in fact those audits and reviews are being done already. Now on the matter of the tariff, this loan talks about an updated tariff structure. It has not been the practice, I don't think, whether it BWS or BEL, ever, that there is any I don't know the best word for it, but any kind of discriminatory practice in terms of having a higher tariff for people in this area or sector versus people in another area, whether rural or urban or on the island or otherwise. It has always been across the board how the tariff structure is established, and I don't see that will likely change. In the case, for example, with same Key Caulker, with BEL, I think currently the electricity is still provided by a diesel plant. The cost of that is far in excess of what is the retail price that consumers pay currently. But that cost is not passed to the Key Caulker residents. That cost is absorbed across the board and ultimately makes it a negligible effect on a per consumer basis.